Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. Thanks for coming to my talk. So let's get started. I'd like to invite you to a little thought experiment. You don't have to talk to anyone. You can if you want to, but it's really just to think through your own experiences. So I'd like to ask you, who are the people in your life with whom you can be the most vulnerable and open? Friends, family, maybe colleagues, you can think it. Yeah? Animals, interesting. Sure, we'll include them for now, yeah. And just think about those people, all right? Or people or animals. And when was the last time you interacted with them, and how? In what context? A phone call, maybe tea, maybe you live with the person or animal. And if it's been a while, what were the circumstances that led to this kind of point in your relationship? Maybe you haven't seen the person in a year. I don't know if you have a best friend you used to be at university with, or wherever. What are the circumstances that got you to this point in your relationship? So anyway, just have that in the background of your mind, if you would, as we think about today. For me, I've worked in a few different contexts for remote, hybrid, in-person teams, and there's a couple that stand out to me, one for positive reasons and one for not so positive reasons. So these are some friends actually in the UK. I'm from the States, but I used to work in a globally distributed team, and these two fellows I'd get together with for engagements. We'd do paired trainings and coaching work, but we weren't together very often. We would do maybe 1, 2, maybe if we're lucky, 3 engagements together, and then we had other people in our group with whom we'd pair. Anyway, so we didn't work in person a whole lot. Most of our work was online or through other means. But another experience I had more recently was this one, and this is my home office setup. And I don't know if you can notice anything interesting about my setup here. This is a reminder to myself every day, based on some feedback from a colleague. She said, "Matt, do not offer any ideas. Just do not." That's quite different experience. Now, this group, I had never met in person. I'd never been in the office for the company. I'd never met any of these people in person. And so it was a quite different experience. We worked completely remotely, but never saw one another. There was an attempt at an in-person get-together, but it didn't get funded, or the funding was removed. So anyway, just a quick background for those of you who aren't familiar with the concept of psychological safety. A few years ago, Google ran something called Project Aristotle. They wanted to find out, they're obviously a data-driven company, they wanted to find out what's the secret sauce to our highest performing teams. Is it the smartest people, the best managers? For a long time we've thought that the best managers lead to the best teams. Is it the people who had kombucha and table tennis in their office? What was it? Went to the best universities, and they found, basically, you've probably seen this image, that the biggest thing that contributed to high-performing teams was the ability for everyone in the team to have a voice to be able to share, which they considered, or now we consider, the concept of psychological safety, and yet it was some research going on already from Edmondson, primarily looking at healthcare teams, hospital teams, and understanding how do hospital teams work, with particular respect to, are people free to share mistakes and admit when they've made a mistake? And her hypothesis was the teams that are the safest will have the fewest errors, the fewest mistakes. And what she found was actually a bit surprising to her. She found that those teams were actually the ones reporting the most mistakes. Now, if you've seen her TED Talk or read her book, you'll know that it's basically because they weren't making more mistakes, they were just reporting more mistakes, and therefore able to resolve them and get to the bottom of things more quickly. So, and of course, before Amy Edmondson, there was Deming, who talked about driving fear out of the workplace. And again, this is the idea of the connection between everyone working at his or her best and being able to be safe, and what that means. Okay, so Amy Edmondson has this concept for us, and so the nice thing is that when we're working in the learning zone, high accountability and high safety, we're able to have nice things like Be more engaged. I know we had a talk earlier today about engagement, and a lot of people are talking about engagement. And we're more productive. I know people care about that, and it's part of one of the outcomes of safety. And people are less stressed. So this is an example of we think about obliquity or trying to achieve a goal indirectly. If we want these things, we probably want to invest in psychological safety. We saw, I know Joanna had the watermelon reporting earlier today. And again, this is the advantage of psychologically safe teams. Just like Dr. Edmondson found, people are able to resolve problems earlier rather than sweeping them under the rug. This is in the news, I know in the States, Boeing. It's a very important example of what happens when we don't have safety. Obviously, the leadership is being held to account for that. So it has some big stakes involved, not just for us as individuals and teams, but for entire organizations. So that leads us to our context now. Just randomly, I'll just say 4 years ago, maybe some of us started working remotely. How many people have worked from a place not the office in the last 4 years? Okay. How many, you can keep your hand up if you've worked from not the office in the last year. All right. The last month? All right. The last week? Okay, right. So I think maybe we all have experiences with working somewhere other than the office. Maybe it's home, maybe it's, I don't know, does anybody do that kind of nomadic travel-based work where you're in like a camper van and you're going all over? Okay, I know some people do that. But the question for me is, what does it mean now to think about psychological safety in the context of our new remote world? Just really quickly, the first known experiment with working from home, IBM, back in late 70s. And then I know in America, the people who are kind of working remotely or working from home were call center people. And so that became a thing for particular parts of industry. Telecommuting, when people became more concerned with the environment, with the cost of gas, being able to spend time with your family, telecommuting. And then we have the first co-working space in San Francisco. And then, of course, now we're getting into the 2000s where technology is really enabling a lot of this, where we didn't have the ability to do that before. And of course, we all know what happened about 4 years ago. And so now we're actually experiencing some of the benefits, but also some of the drawbacks of this. So this is for you to get to. This is a particularly sinister looking Elon Musk. I don't know, but he very famously said that not only is working remotely not as productive, but it's morally wrong. Okay, that's interesting. That's a strong statement. And of course, now there's kind of like things have gone on various directions in terms of trade-offs. Is the work-life balance there? Do we have to worry about that? Does this affect our ability to become leaders? This is obviously Lou Gerstner, well-known executive, talking about, no, it's not possible. So, but people are happier. I think, I don't know, if we asked, do you like the option of working from somewhere not the office? I'm guessing most of us would say, yes, the option's nice. So the thing is that there's mixed results. There's trade-offs both ways. So from this study, you can see most people found it easier to balance work-life, and yet the second bit there is that we feel less connected to our coworkers. So there's trade-offs. And so you might say our relationship to remote work is complicated. That's fair to say. So my question that I wanted to discover, and maybe you're interested in too, is not whether yes or no, remote work, right or wrong, morally wrong, as Elon Musk would say, but really, how do we help each other to work at our best by having increased psychological safety wherever we are, however our teams are comprised, wherever we're working. So I conducted some research. Maybe some of you participated. I don't know. Did anyone participate in my survey? Okay, thank you. All right. So we have a few results, but I don't know how statistically significant my research is. I got some feedback from Dr. Edmondson and Mark Mortensen, so I think they're okay with it, maybe. But anyway, the question: does it matter where you work? Of course, it depends. So the survey, basically, I used Dr. Edmondson's 7 drivers of psychological safety. You may be familiar with her way of looking at things. Mistakes are held against me. People reject others for being different. It's difficult to ask others for help. I'm able to bring up problems, and it's safe to take a risk. There's a couple more here. No one would deliberately act to undermine me. It's an interesting question. And then my unique skills are valued. So that all comprises what I'm calling total safety and what she uses in her personal safety scan on her website. Okay, so the factors then that I was interested in, your time and your context, how long you've been in a team, although I'm using very intentionally the word context rather than team, because for me, team has a particular definition and a particular way of thinking about team. I'll tell more about that in a minute. Whether you've met a teammate in person, does that matter? Whether you've met your manager in person, maybe. Days working from home, type of context, size of context, last time you interacted in person, last time you interacted on camera. So anyway, all these things I was interested in. What are the effects of these on our psychological safety? I was a bit surprised because my hypothesis going in was that the more you worked from being together, not from home, the higher safety you would have. That's not exactly the case. So here's what I found in my research is that the things that really actually related to safety for people who reported in the survey, it wasn't the number of days working from home. So you can see the middle category here. It was maybe a little bit here, but the things that actually mattered much more were the size of your team, the size of the group you're working in, and the type of context you're in. And I'll say more about that in just a minute. Some of these things did matter, like I thought this was interesting, whether you'd met your manager in person. It affected if you were able to ask others for help. I'm not quite sure why, but maybe you have an idea. But again, the thing that actually mattered was how often whether you'd met people in person or worked in person, but not whether you worked from home all the time. So the idea here is that if you worked within the last workday, within the last week, within the last month, all those things mattered to, this is the average here, all those things actually contributed and kind of amplify the other things. But for those people who had never worked or very seldom worked with each other or been in person, reported the lowest level of safety. Some of you, I don't know, do you have a policy where if you're online, you have to have your camera on? Yeah? Yeah. It's encouraged, yeah. Some people actually feel it inhibits safety, right? Like I don't want to share where I'm working. It's kind of like you're in my space. But what you see here is actually it doesn't matter too much, apparently, especially when you consider some of these other factors. All right, so I don't know if anyone's like the promoter of on camera. Everybody needs to be on camera, or if it's maybe not as big of a deal after all. The context type did matter, though. And so I kind of broke this option into these categories. Leaders and managers, people who are kind of in charge of things, shall we say, and their interactions are with other leaders, a bit surprisingly reported the highest safety. I'm not sure quite what's going on there, but people who are working in a team structure. So the way I define team is a bounded context, so you know who's in and who's out. You're working together on a shared goal, but your work is interdependent. And that's a key definition here for if you're doing your tasks and they don't relate in any way to what Carl's doing over here, you might be in the same group, but you're really not I would not consider that a team. So that's just my personal definition. But you can see that matrix workers were the ones who had the lowest level of safety. People who were working on multiple projects, the groups they were working with varied, and it wasn't always consistent. Likewise, the size was important here. So the smaller, generally, the better. And so, it, again, allows people an opportunity to get to know each other better. And I'll talk about some practices we can do for that. And then when we combine a couple of these factors, we find that it's really even more significant. So people who are working in a team context and who had worked together in person in some way recently were the ones who had the most safety. Again, it's not that you can't have safety. It's just this is generally the pattern that we saw from the research. Okay, So just if you need a quick kind of takeaway, the general approach here is when we have a small size group and you have a team context, team structure, and some in-person interaction. Again, doesn't have to be every day, not even every week, but those are the ones who had the highest safety in the research. So why might this be? This is from a book, The Culture Code, but it has to do something with how we as humans work and interact with each other. This idea that we express ourselves, we communicate much more richly through other things than just the written word or even just sending emails. Okay, so the question for us is really, okay, that's maybe interesting at an academic level, but what do we do about it as people who are leading teams, in teams, supporting change across organizations? Amy Edmondson has these 4 categories of how we might think about safety. And so if you're familiar with the 3-armed sweater, that's the Etsy example that they have the failure award. The person who's made the biggest fail in the company gets the 3-armed sweater every year. So anyway, these kind of 4 categories are what I use to now propose some things we might think about as we want to help increase and cultivate safety in teams. One of the biggest factors that one of the biggest things we can do as leaders is really have meaningful conversations with people. There's a lot of surveys or research that shows that the biggest thing that people are interested in having conversations with their leaders is just career conversations, especially among younger generations. And it doesn't mean you're taking a teleological approach like, ooh, do I have to tell whether this person is likely to be promoted or not? It's just having a conversation, sharing some of the benefits of your own career. What have you done? What's going on in your own life? These are the kind of meaningful conversations. The other bits are really just kind of things, whatever you would be doing in person, having a conversation, try to replicate that online. So one of the things it's easy to find is people are trying to multitask on you. Right? You're online and you kind of see someone's eyes kind of moving over here, or they're kind of you can kind of hear the typing. I worked with a guy one time. He had the loudest keyboard, and he's like clack 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 clack. Dude, just call me back later, right? One of the things I try to discipline myself to do is when I have a conversation online is actually have my hands above the camera so that people can see I'm not trying to multitask on them. It's just kind of like a psychological reminder. Matt's not checking his phone, or he's not like trying to answer an email while he's talking to me. This is something I kind of discovered with a team that we'd never worked together in person, but we found a lot of things that we were coming to. We were a lot of smart people on the team, but we couldn't quite always agree, or we were kind of making assumptions about what we thought about particular issue, like story points, or how do we plan? What's a best practice? In this case, we were talking about best practices. Do we like best practices, or do we say, well, there's no such thing as best practices, only good practices in context? And so the problem was that we would have these kind of battles in meetings or in places where it mattered. And so we started spending some time outside of planned meetings and having these let's talk about sessions. And they were just opportunities, they were optional. And I said, how do you think about forecasting? How do you think about product development? What is this to you, like in your experiences? And it gave it kind of like a lower temperature, a easier setting for us to just share our experiences and not necessarily agree, but at least understand where the others were coming from. That was really helpful. This is, if you want to know more about working aloud, you can see Joanna. She mentioned this earlier today. I want to give her a hat tip. But this is really important because so often when we're working remotely or not with people, there's a lot of information loss about how we're thinking about things. And so I had a former colleague, Salim Siddiqui, who talked about pairing as conversation over code, right? And so we don't have that all the time when we're working remotely. We're making decisions. We're kind of processing things. And so it's really helpful to just talk about how you came to a decision, regardless of what that decision or the outcome was. So that engenders trust. Oh, okay, I see how you're thinking about that. Yeah, that's a different way how I would do it, but that's great. Now I understand, and I'm not distrustful of you. I had a colleague, I hadn't met him for a year. It took a whole year to meet him in person. And when I met him, his name was Leo. When I met him, he said, Matt, you're so much different in person. Online, I kind of didn't like you. And I felt bad. I'm like, no, it's the same me. But we relate differently and we understand each other. And so much of what we assume about people is just kind of the mental processes. And so working aloud can be really helpful for that. This is a situation where I had a colleague who actually did have enough courage to speak up and kind of share how she was feeling. And you can see in this, well, if you can read it. Basically, a couple of things here. I have a long way to go, she's saying, and it makes me very sad. And so I'm being completely open, wearing my heart on my sleeve, so go easy. So this is really emotional language. And so this person has taken a risk to share how she's feeling. And many of us would be like, yeah, that's great, I support you. But we don't go to the extra step of actually making that explicit. And so I just said, thank you for sharing that. That's amazing. That's really helpful. Thanks for doing it. And I sent this to the whole group just to kind of make sure that she felt validated, but also that we're normalizing these kinds of sharing. And so she appreciated that. So this is a useful technique, whatever you're doing, but after 8, don't collaborate. So especially when you've got a lot of people who are on camera. And to me, it's just, why are we going through this charade, pretending that we're all paying attention? If you look on or if you're planning a meeting and you have more than 8 people on there, there's probably a better way to do things. All right, so just a simple, too many people. Right, so again, this has to do with making the implicit explicit. So we all have kind of expectations of each other, how we like to work, how we want others to work. There's organizational constraints. So finding that through team working agreements. I'm still surprised about how many teams don't have working agreements and just kind of ways of working, being very explicit about that. This is something that's been useful for me in a remote context, is these personal operating manuals, Guide to Managing Me. There was a woman who joined my team, and as soon as she started the first day, she said, here's Matt, take this, Matt. And I said, what is this? And I said, it's the Guide to Managing Me. And I'm like, wow, that's awesome. This is quite a gift. But it was really great because she took the time, and I think it helps us understand ourselves even when we realize, what do I like about work? What kind of values do I maybe think about that I don't maybe make explicit? Some people call it the API of me. But again, this is a gift to give to our teammates. Similarly, if you ever use the Marketplace of Skills, Heidi Helfand, I know it from her, but she kind of takes you through just who am I, and sharing that with the team. Again, the invitation is there. People can disclose as much or as little as they want to, but it's really nice because you can go through things like what I want to learn, but also what I have to share with you. A lot of times when we're working remotely, we don't understand all the gifts that people have, all the ways they can contribute, maybe in unexpected ways outside of their role definition. This is something I just kind of developed based on Josh Kirievsky's Modern Agile, one of the tenets of which is make people awesome. So this is just kind of a little activity, make each other awesome. But you can measure safety. And so a lot of people are like, yeah, I think we have safety in our team. That's good enough for me. Or you've probably been in a room where a leader comes in, maybe like a high-level leader, and says, town hall, this is a safe space. Give us criticism, whatever you want. Any question is okay. As well-intentioned as they may be, that's just a fundamental misunderstanding of how safety works. You can't just declare safety. It doesn't work that way. So I encourage leaders to actually poll for safety and find out, is this really safe? And you might find different answers. There's other different kinds of tools that you can use as well. Doing the simple safety check periodically. This is not a new thing, but I find this is oftentimes surprising. There was a team that I worked with, I was coaching. It was a remote team, and I was starting with them, and so I said, well, I'm going to introduce you to the topic of safety. We're going to do a little safety poll. The key here is anonymous, by the way, doing this anonymously. But it came back that not everybody was safe. There were several people who were in the unsafe zone. And of course, the next question is, okay, who feels unsafe? No, that's not right. No. Pavel. No, the question is not to say who feels unsafe, but to ask the entire group, why might someone here feel unsafe? And usually if there's at least one or two people who are in that kind of like high safety category, they're happy to share. And so that was true here. One of the veteran people on the team, he's like, well, Matt, what you might not know is that sometimes our managers pop on the audio part of the call and they don't announce themselves. And I was, that's interesting. What might we do about that? And so there's some kind of little hack where you could figure out how many people are on the audio, how many people are on the video. We did that. It matched. There were no lurkers. We repolled safety and everybody was safe. Right? And again, it didn't mean the managers were evil. They might have actually been calling in just to kind of be there and be supportive, and they didn't want to interrupt by introducing themselves. But the effect was very different on that team. Okay, this is another thing that I found we really lose sometimes is we have meetings online. We have maybe sometimes wall-to-wall meetings, but we don't often work together simultaneously, like pairing or ensemble work. And so I try to make space for my teams and my teammates, let's work on this together. Because even in that process, you start discovering a lot about how people think. And again, diversity of thought process is really important. What happens is we end up not trusting each other because we don't see that and we don't kind of express that as we work, and we often do our own tasks alone. Collaborative friction. This is a group from my church, leadership group we worked with. It's often difficult to kind of push through that upper level of kind of superficial getting along. Especially it's harder when we're working remotely. And so not being afraid to have what people call collaborative friction, it feels uncomfortable in the moment. It feels really, really painful, actually, because we're discovering we're going in a different place, and we're upsetting our expectations about each other. But what happened here was that we actually were able to work through some of the tension, and even just kind of work through, apologize to each other, and then we came through at a different place and a much deeper level of safety. And so these days, this group is at a higher level of safety than they've ever been before. It wasn't possible without going through this period of collaborative friction. This is interesting. I found this recently. This is a great statement. This bank has. This is kind of like what everybody should know statement, right? And they're talking about, hey, psychological safety should be a priority. Yes. And then you go to one of their job listings, and the very second thing is flawless execution. And so it's like there's like this kind of what's going on here? So paying attention to like what we say and what we want to do and what's actually going on in our organization is important. We've all seen this guy. This is a colleague of mine in Greece. We were both in these little booths. Some of them are really cool, soundproof booths. I was in one, and like he was in the other, and I just took a picture of him. We were both on call. We were both in the office, but we were both on calls with people in different places. And so I think people are rightfully pushing back, saying, why do you want me to come to the office if I'm just going to be on calls all day? So I'm proposing we make better use. So this is a company I worked for, ThoughtWorks. They had an annual get-together. They called it Away Days. Had some fun. This is clearly not work. We had a talent show. We had an immersive training time, working on projects together. Just look at people's faces here. Look, just like the body language, people touching each other and just being, having a sense of camaraderie here. And so, again, we want to make better use of our time together. Whiteboards, etc. Just making time for play and unstructured time. I don't know if you look at your diary and you look at what's on for the day, you're probably optimizing for all the meetings. And so this is a team I had, a couple of teams I've actually done this with. We would just periodically, after our remote stand-up, we would spend 5 minutes playing GeoGuessr. So it's fun. It takes 5 minutes, literally, and you can learn a lot about each other and like, oh, I've been to this place, or I want to go to this place. Tell me more about that. And again, it's just play. That leads to a lot of good things. Last but not least, anyone from Sweden here? Yeah, ish. Fika is just a beautiful cultural thing from Sweden. This is, you just have a break. Take a break. And my rule, I don't know if this is the proper Swedish rule, but my rule is, first have some kind of food, sweets preferably, coffee. You can talk about anything but work. That's the rule. So a lot of people they can't quite grok that. They're like, but I want to talk about this. I said, no. We'll talk about that later. How are you? What's going on? It's just humanizing our work a little bit more. So anyway, back to these guys. I no longer work at ThoughtWorks, either of these guys. This is just maybe a couple years ago, last year maybe. I still keep in touch with these guys. I actually collaborate with Luca on some other things, even today, just because we have that level of safety. We very seldom see each other, but we develop that through all these different ways of working, techniques, and it's had a lasting effect on our relationship. So anyway, if you'd like to know more, I have a few things on my website. I'd love to hear your experiences. Thank you for coming today.